Welcome to Killer Cure. This is a brief episode that's going to break down the most critical healthcare headlines affecting us and investments today. We're actually having our marketing director, Melissa Gleeson, join us, and I'll let her introduce herself in a minute. But overall, we normally would have Bill Liao on, and we're sending our thoughts and prayers out to him around the loss of his mother. And some of the topics we're going to cover today are relevant to that as we really dive in to the navigating health and how things can happen and dealing with loss and some of those topics. Mel, do you want to do a quick intro? And then you're going to help me stay on track today.
That's right.
It's kind of your key
Um,
roles.
yeah. So I'm Melissa Gleeson. I am the marketing director here at Seed. I have spent my career the past 12 years in marketing in various business sectors, investment, real estate, and most recently healthcare. I've been in healthcare now for about 7 years. And at Seed, I lead content and branding and our digital marketing. And I guess on a personal note, I am a mom to two young boys who keep me very busy. But there's sort of a daily reminder of, our mission at Seed and why, prevention and longevity and early detection really matters to me.
That's awesome, Mel. Thanks for that. And I do know I've seen you have both of them since you've worked with us, and they can be a handful.
Yep.
But I think you're crushing as a mom, you're crushing as a marketing director, and we just appreciate what you do. And keeping me on track will be the key thing. So as I think about that, since I'm going to do a lot of talking this episode, I really want to dive into a variety of topics. There's a lot of news happening, and the MAHA report. I want to talk about what's going on with childhood diseases and what the perspective is there. The idea that Biden was diagnosed after being president with late stage, prostate cancer is out there. Some first in human advancements with CRISPR, and really getting down to how we actually change the genome. Early on, we have seen an IPO in healthcare and digital health, which is also something we're going to cover. And really, we're seeing advancements with computing power really drive change in diagnosing chronic disease, including Alzheimer's. We're seeing a blood test that can actually help lean into that. There's all sorts of other topics we're going to cover today, and we're going to just kind of do them really quickly. And certainly, if the audience wants to reach out to us on any of these topics, we're happy to dive deeper. And each episode, we're gonna go into different technologies and other things. Upcoming guests, we have Espen, who is a quantum breath expert, who many of you may know and follow. He's quite out there in how your breath work can really help you with advancing, the ball in reversing some illnesses. I think it'll be a compelling conversation. We also have Stephen Ibaraki joining us this summer, who is so far in tech with his background around Triple E and advanced tech and deep tech and virtually every aspect. I think he'll be a great guest. He also is probably one of the most prolific interviewers out there, and he's interviewed the who's who in healthcare and has a perspective on all of that. So I'm excited for upcoming guests. I'm also super excited to cover some of these topics today. Mel, anything to add to that before we go on?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you and I kind of talk about all the time that news in healthcare moves fast. Each week there's new research, breakthroughs, controversies, which we might get into today, but every week sort of brings something worth unpacking. And that's why I think conversations like what we'll talk about today is just an important way to sort of stay sharp and question what matters, keep ourselves, people, in the industry honest and sort of making sense of some of the headlines that, through our lens of prevention and longevity. And I know when you talk about headlines, especially, in the past week or so, there's no way you could have missed some of the news about former President Biden's diagnosis.
Yeah, that may be a good place to start and kind of toss the deck around. When I think about it, if the ruler of the free world, as we like to think of it in America, is diagnosed with a late stage disease, just simply because the tests weren't run, think about everyone else, right? I sit back and go, okay, um, was it his choice to not have the tests? Was it, I ask myself a lot of questions around that. For those of you that have missed the news, Biden at 82 was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer that spread into his bones, had already metastasized, and it's a very high Gleason score. The symptoms emerged as urinary issues leading to diagnosis, and really, he hadn't had a PSA screening since 2014, which was when he was 72. The treatment options at this stage are not good. Although we're sending prayers his way. I mean, he's, obviously served the country. And, when you start to really look at what this is indicative of, men traditionally, it's the number one killer of men, right? And we have got a lot of innovation around diagnosing it. And really, PSA screening is one, but there's a lot of other things. Even when I go to Fountain every year and look for any challenges and have a full body MRI and a lot of other screening, it eliminates that risk for me for that year. That doesn't mean it's going to go away. And when you start to think about the controversies around why he didn't get screened, right? We have a theory at Fountain: if you can see it, hear it, feel it, touch it, like if somebody can hear it with a stethoscope, it's too late. If it's already affecting your urine output, it's generally too late, right? There's all sorts of things that could have been done if caught early. We're just thinking about him and his family. But we're also thinking, how does a president, miss a diagnosis like this? And how do the lay people that aren't presidents actually get the treatment advances, create the public awareness and, really dive into, how we can be proactive about our health versus the reactive aspects. That's kind
Right.
of the thought for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was reported that, he was scheduled to even just receive a physical at one point in 2023 and delayed it because of his busy travel schedule. And, I mean, he was the president, so obviously he's quite busy, but how common we're seeing, scenarios like that where people just delay their necessary healthcare evaluations because they're too busy. And, these diagnoses, they can't wait, they won't wait on you. I think that, to your point, I think it's 1 in 8 men, will be diagnosed with prostate cancer in their lifetime. So hopefully, his diagnosis, will sort of start the conversations, maybe bring awareness to men, especially in high risk groups, to sort of start those conversations with their providers, about their prostate health.
Yeah, I'm rooting for that, and I'm rooting for really point of care changes that actually help the clinical environment diagnose and lead people to know how important it is to screen. Like if you're not screening for the major chronic diseases, that includes cancer, heart disease, brain health, metabolic health, mental health, then you're putting yourself at risk every year. And I just think, the old days of a physical, which is basically a blood test with one mode, maybe look, cough twice, and a few things like that, is just not where we should be today. There's too much tech and enabling diagnostics and process of care that really can serve that. So I agree with you, Mel.
Yeah.
I
Um,
also, sorry.
Obviously with his health in the news, it's really a part of that bigger conversation about prevention and long-term care. And you, of course, brought up chronic illness, which was, the main topic in the recent MAHA report, sort of their first report. So I don't know, I didn't know if you wanted to go ahead and start talking about that and, really what was brought attention to some of those chronic diseases, especially among children.
I think it's a great time to talk about it. The idea that that report came out. I think there's a lot to talk about around it. For those of you who don't know, Make America Healthy Again, right, was the whole initiative led by RFK Jr. And they released a full report that identified that over 40% of U.S. children suffer from chronic illnesses like asthma, diabetes, and obesity. 40%. That is a massive number, and it's increased dramatically since I was a kid and even you were a kid. I mean, even you're a lot younger than I am. The relative perspective of that and the evolution of just when my kids were growing up, which they're in their early 20s, we didn't see the chronic illnesses that we see today. The ultra processed food is what they're attributing a lot of it to. The environmental toxins, pesticides detected in blood, lifestyle factors, and somewhat things like sedentary behavior, screen time. I mean, it was back in my day, it was go out and play and come back before dinner. And now it's just a little bit different in that, there's a lot of other things that get in the way of that. If I really look at it, if I look at this report, I think about the food is a big reason that it's leaning into that. The education of how to eat is a real reason. I also think that we're facing an epidemic around the endocrine system, and I know this may not this may resonate, may not make sense in some ways, but even my 20-something-year-old, had gone 20 years without actually having a blood test, like a true blood test with a full metabolic panel, testing hormones and all that. And if you think of my daughter, even, she had the same issue. She had her first blood test her entire life when she was 23. And you think about that, and you think about what's happening, and this report is indicative of probably what's not happening. Kids are getting put on SSRIs and are being affected by the toxins, the environment, the food, and the sedentary behavior. And they have diagnostics that tell them they're ADHD or they're depressed, and they're getting medication for that to solve that symptom. So I think that the world we're living in is kind of this progression where we've seen the food sources go downhill in the last, call it 15 to 20 years. We've seen a dramatic change in people's behavior with the advent of cell phones and process and all that. And I think that this report means that we have a lot to do when it comes to treating even the root cause of of the issue of the kids and the root cause of the issue in our young adults that don't want to procreate, that actually are, could be just simply having hormonal issues, their endocrine systems might be deficient, and all of that can be easily fixed. So for me, this is like a wake-up call for America that not only the food system needs to change, and I think it's a big report, kind of a milestone.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that ultimately, it boils down to children's health is not just a personal issue, it's a society issue. As a mom to young children, obviously food is, something that I am, constantly in the search of, healthiest options for my family. When it comes down to it, fresh produce and whole grains, quality proteins, they're often more expensive than your processed, calorie-dense alternatives, and that makes it hard for some families to prioritize nutrition over cost. And that's a real challenge when low-income households are stretching these grocery budgets. And it's not that they don't realize healthy healthy eating is the option. It's that the short-term cost is a barrier. So I just say that because I think it's important to note that sometimes it's a bigger systemic issue that's not personal choice. It's more so about access and affordability, and creating a food system that puts families in a position to where they can kind of really prioritize what's best for their health.
It's easier said than done
Mhm.
in an on-demand society where we want bananas right?
Right.
I'll never forget, like, I go back to this is in my previous world. I actually was an investor in a bunch of buildings, and one of them was a banana ripening plant. Who knew that there was a banana ripening plant,
We
right,
needed
where
that.
they would bring unripe bananas and then they would gas them to get them to a certain amount of ripeness. And when you walk into the grocery store, you're buying those bananas, whether
Right.
it's Publix, Whole Foods, Kroger, depending on where you are in the world, in particularly in the U.S., there's all sorts of different ways that they bring bananas to you. But the key is that they want them on demand, right?
Right.
So if you're thinking about like how you change the root cause of where that banana comes from and how ripe it is, the best thing to do is plant your own tree, right? Like that's the best thing you can do. If you can't
Right.
do that, find a friend that's planted their own tree,
Right.
right? And make your own kind of groceries. And when you start to think about the challenges of this, I think about how your kids are going to grow up versus how mine did, and even in that 20-year span, there's a massive amounts of change that now we're more aware of
Right.
that that I think if we do it right, we can actually make a difference. And the cost of having your own tree might actually be less than you walking in the grocery store and buying the gassed bananas. I mean, it's
I
kind of
know.
crazy.
Yeah, it
So
is.
I don't know how we solve it, except awareness and the direction around food consumption. And you know, we have the same problem with pharmacies. You walk into a pharmacy, and they'd rather sell you a bag of potato chips than actually give you the care delivery that exists. So we've got our issues in America, and I'm sure the European food system has their own issues. But we're definitely bringing a magnifying to it with this MAHA report.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that that's, how do you think, how do you do change? And it's conversations like this. It's continuing the momentum, of evidence that we now know. And, just the hope that, everybody wants what's best for their kids. And you just keep kind of making these decisions and finding evidence, based in, compassion as well. But, so I feel like the MAHA report sort of showed us, this burden of chronic disease, but it also kind of raises the question of how care is delivered. And I know in the beginning we talked about the Hinge Health IPO, and they're really sort of reimagining care deliveries in ways that are becoming way more accessible and scalable, of course, tech enabled.
They really are actually. So there's two reasons the Hinge Health IPO is important. One is what they're doing in digital health and how they're actually leveraging it with employers, with patients to manage the chronic pain crisis, the process of that, and then how they're getting scale with that. That's number one is their care delivery model and what's working, and that this is somewhat of a validation of that. The second thing that I think is important is that it is an exit, right? To some degree, like as an investor, we hear a lot about the economy and the challenges of the economy and what's going on how capital is locked up. And I would actually argue that in healthcare, we've seen a lot more strategic exits over the last, call it 3 to 5 years, and even more recently, and versus true IPOs. But this being a digital health IPO, I think is really encouraging for the sector that we're investing in that we are clearly centered on the right things, meaning tech enablement in healthcare is going to be a hot topic from now until forever, right? Like we've got a dramatic opportunity ahead of us to change the process of care, the engagement of care and where patients are engaged, and then the delivery and how it actually reaches that critical point to save lives and actually get people, healthier and manufacturing a more well patient. I reflect back on early in my career when I was in the OR, and talking with, an oncology doctor that was like the who's who of MD Anderson. And he was telling me, well, we're thinking about it wrong. All we really need to do is manufacture a well patient, right? Instead of waiting until they're really sick and doing that. This was 34 years ago. And when you start to think about that, isn't that this? This is actually doing some of that manufacturing to engage the patient, make sure that they are finding all the non-invasive solutions around chronic pain, the growth drivers and what's happening in telehealth, which is not driven by COVID. COVID drove telehealth up, but ultimately this is driven by need and demand by the patient because they're chronically suffering with pain, right? And how you mitigate that pain and how you manage that pain without getting them addicted to opioids and the challenges of that is a real thing. And this particular IPO encourages me on many levels that we're actually focusing on the right things and that not only the patients are engaging in it, but that the investors are supporting it and driving it to market because it was a successful IPO.
Yeah, and especially in its space. I mean, it's musculoskeletal care. You know, there's such a need to reduce the need for in-person, visits, and how do you make therapy more accessible from them? So it's really encouraging that hopefully this aligns like with what you said, the growing demand for sort of convenient at-home care for especially these patients. But yeah, I think it was, sort of the first major digital health company to go public since the pandemic. And so it's hopefully paving the way for, these other sort of unicorns to pursue public markets. And it echoes exactly what, our mission is. And hopefully is this sort of revival of healthcare tech IPOs.
I agree. I think it's whether all of our exits are not centered on IPO as the one exit strategy. But I will tell you that as that loosens up and you see this traction, it's very encouraging, and we actually should see some real, in my opinion, some contraction in the public markets. But seeing these IPOs come out and hopefully more will be really encouraging. The best comparison when I go back to a comp to this exit would be Livongo selling to Teladoc at a multiple of 63 times sales. That was 18.5 billion in 2021. When you think about that, and you think about now where we've traveled, that was with the COVID boom of telehealth and the drivers of all of that. The real move here is now getting to more of a steady state of where telehealth is accepted and engaged in the care delivery process. And to me, I think that's a big thing for our tech-enabled, type of services and how we're approaching the healthcare delivery and how the market's approaching it. So I'm super encouraged as an investor and as a human, trying to make a
Right.
difference. To me, it's good.
Yeah, I feel like it just sort of represents the future of scaling care and the goals of what we, hope for that market to turn into. And, when you talk about scaling that, you mentioned it in the beginning, but this story of the first baby, being treated with personalized in vivo gene editing, it sort of feels like science fiction, but it's real and very encouraging and happening right now.
So we've heard a lot about gene editing and CRISPR over the last 10 years, probably. And when you start to think about the sci-fi mentality, I don't know if you're into sci-fi, Mel, but the idea of like all of a sudden we have extra body parts, right? Or, we can modify our genes and we can target specific things that we want to be recessive and, enhancing certain things, and we could be superhuman, right? This is like the first real human to go undergo CRISPR in a in vivo situation. So pre-birth, right? Like you're actually editing the genes of a child, and looking at how you can actually leverage this with potential of like treating cancers neurological disorders, hereditary diseases, and the challenges of actually having, being a parent and having a child that has any of these issues at a young age or pre-birth. I mean, and what you would normally do is sometimes even go down to like termination, and that's
Right.
not what I feel like is where we should be today with
Right.
all the technology. And so this milestone marks a leap in personalized medicine down to like how do you tweak somebody's genes while they're being grown, and you can do things that are specific to say sickle cell or retinal disorders. You can actually have a baby born that wouldn't normally be able to see that could see if you do something about it early. So I think the science is incredible. I think for somebody like me who's 56, I think, well, how soon did we think all of this would happen?
Right.
And I think we're ahead of schedule. But I want it all. I want to see like the advancement in technology really get enabled so that we can eliminate the chronic illnesses at a young age, and bring forward the right things. We also need to get them to eat right once they're born, but that's a different,
Yeah.
different topic. So I think it's
I know.
sci-fi.
I know. I mean, I think about some patients right now that, have rare genetic disorders and, don't have effective treatment. What hope, this sort of provides, and just, the promise of tailoring unique treatments, for your genetic makeup is just, pretty incredible. And just that, you talk about, sort of the Jetsons, the future, and but like the precision medicine, it's here. And timing is everything right now.
I agree. I mean, and go back to, I don't know if you read the whole book of Life Force, but I'll never forget, that was Tony Robbins' book. In the book, there was all sorts of advanced gene editing conversations. There was a whole lot of content in there. And one of them actually was how a scientist was actually pre-programming pig hearts to be epigenetically perfect for us as humans, whether it's a pig heart or lungs or anything like that. It's like all of a sudden you can just have a set new heart sitting on the shelf waiting for you when this one wears out. I'm like, I want that.
Right.
Like a wonderful human, her name's Doris Taylor. She is, well, my son's name is Taylor, and my mom's name is Doris. So I always remember her name. But she literally walked up to me and said, "Hey, what's your name?" "Oh, I build body parts, like new body parts for people." And I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is where we're going. We're going to where you can have, your genes adjusted. You can have, deal with, what I would call congenital, diseases that would generally be impactful to a, very challenged life for that infant, or if at all. And, you think about now that even us adults who have, chronic illnesses that we haven't taken care of could potentially have a body part on the shelf just to replace our heart, right? Like, I think that's kind of where we're going. And I think
Yeah.
CRISPR is indicative of that as a good example that we're able to do that today, and we couldn't have done it even a few years ago. So the advancements happening in leaps and bounds, like Moore's law compounded by, a tremendous amount of computing power, is kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like that's, what we're seeing with Alzheimer's in the same vein, right? Something that, the recent FDA approval, how a simple blood test to help diagnose Alzheimer's. I mean, typically what? It's expensive and invasive scans and spinal taps, and, here we are with something a little more simplified.
I agree. I mean, the less invasive, some people would call a blood test invasive, right? Frankly, for me, a blood test is like due course. I mean, I do one every 90 days or so, and it's just what I do. And when you start to think about a blood test being able to diagnose Alzheimer's at early stage, and then how you can actually identify those proteins and the amyloid plaques in the blood, and frankly, the indicators that you can find versus all of the PET scans and spinal taps, you know, that it's FDA approved means something, right? How widely it gets used is going to be an interesting thing. I think that if we can enable early diagnosis of Alzheimer's, really almost any dementia or Alzheimer's or any kind of brain deficit issue, you can actually do a lot more for those patients the earlier you catch it. And for me, it kind of fits our whole thesis. It's like get a diagnosis early and you can actually work on it. If you get a diagnosis late, you're chasing your tail and the disease is managing you. So for me, it all speaks towards like why we're doing what we do and why we're investing in early detection and processes of care and making sure that they're available at the right place at the right time to be able to catch it early. So I think this just ratifies the things that we talk about on here and makes it even more valid.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I think that this is what progress looks like. It is making an innovation that's not just available, but reachable and speaks to something we're always talking about, which is democratization of care, and making this accessible. Alzheimer's touches, I think, nearly every family at this point. So to have tools that expand access, to answers, is a really meaningful shift.
I think that is a meaningful shift. I think the other thing to really dive into there is what do you do about it, right? So you catch it early, and what I really want us to as we go down the road here with next episodes, and I think the focus is the conversation around, okay, we've diagnosed ourselves with Alzheimer's. Does that mean we're getting Alzheimer's? Does that mean we can't? What do we do? How do we actually reverse the plaque that is actually causing the problem in the first place? And same thing with heart disease. We're actually I know we talked to one of the founders and scientists that invented a drug called Cyclarity that's actually in clinical trials right now. That drug is actually completely reversionary and breaks down all 7-ketocholesterol, which is the cholesterol that hardens in your plaque, and it hardens in your arteries, sorry. So when you have soft plaque or hard plaque, it's made up of this 7-ketocholesterol that's in your blood. One of the really interesting things to me is that is the first drug that's really completely reversion for heart disease. And they haven't tested it to say, okay, it's going to break down this amyloid plaque. But just think, if it's breaking down plaque, and the cholesterol that's actually in your body, that it could actually have a very relative perspective and impact on Alzheimer's and dementia. So for me, diagnosing it early is not the nail in the coffin per se. It's actually the incentive to actually start reversionary treatments and find things that actually do add value. You'll hear from Espen around what he believes quantum breathing helps, maintain continuity and brain health. There's other things that you'll hear about, hyperbaric chambers and things that are becoming more accessible that also will allow for improvement in brain health and expanding your brain tissue. So all of these things, catching it early is a key ingredient. Treating it early is super super key in my opinion, and kind of what we stand for.
Yeah, I mean, I think just even the question of what do I do with this diagnosis, maybe 20, 30 years ago, wasn't even an option. You get that news in a sterile doctor's office and, you go home and you you start to prepare, right? And I think it's an incredible time and turning point, hopefully, as we continue to see these innovations, as we continue to back them, that we will really kind of change that conversation going forward. And, even just this conversation reminds us how quickly healthcare is evolving. And it's just important to stay thoughtful and curious and sort of grounded in the big picture, which I know is what we're doing at Seed.
Yeah, that's a well put, Mel. It sounds like you've been podcasting for years, and doing a great job of it. And that is our thesis at Seed, and the ultimate awareness is, it does matter where you buy your bananas, right? it does matter that you actually take some steps to get diagnosed for chronic disease early. It does matter because you can make a difference if you actually catch it early and you actually start eating the proper banana. Okay, like I'm using that as a metaphor.
Great.
But the idea of we don't need a couple 100-page report like the MAHA report to tell us that the kids aren't getting healthier, they're getting sicker. So to me, it's something we have to be aware of and we have to be on top of, and we have to create awareness and cut through what I call the noise. And I think, having these short episodes that include, kind of current events and news that allows us to set the table and create awareness, for Alzheimer's diagnostics, for, clearing the path for digital health and musculoskeletal issues. All of those things are really relevant. And there's a ton of other topics that will be coming, including cell reprogramming and, what's happening on the edge of science that is really encouraging for us as people in the business, because getting back to that manufacturing of a well patient is key. And the earlier you start, the better your chances, and the better your chances for longevity and healthy lifespan. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. So I'm encouraged by all this.
Yeah, I mean, me too. I think these are important conversations. I'm grateful to be a part of today's, and I'm really excited for our upcoming guests as well.
Awesome. And really for upcoming episodes, I think everyone should be pretty excited about the people we're bringing on. And I would say we can call this one a wrap in a couple minutes. The focus of the forward looking is how do we add value by educating, things around preventative healthcare, biohacking, which is kind of a big nomenclature out there that, cold plunging and doing all this stuff, and how you actually decide, well, what do I do? What makes it right for you, or what motivates you to be in the gym more, and build muscle mass? So for me as a both an entrepreneur, a dad, so a father, a friend that wants to see my kids grow really old and successful and have, their kids like you're having and do the things, I want to be around. So for me, selfishly, I want to drive the science where we can all have, better lifespan and we can be doing the things that we want. In the long run, we will see a lot of opportunities and a tremendous amount of opportunity to make a difference, as well as invest and drive change. And for us, that's what really resonates. So appreciate everybody tuning in today. Next episode will be out in a couple weeks, and we will make sure that it'll be a good conversation, and we look forward to the next one.
Stay tuned.